Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking on a story that, frankly, it represents one of the most profound betrayals of trust imaginable within an educational setting. We are dissecting the Richneck Elementary shooting case. It's a catastrophic event involving a first-grade teacher, a 6-year-old student, and, well, a monumental multi-million-dollar legal battle centered entirely on accountability.
That's exactly right. Our mission today is really to move past those initial headlines, and synthesize the absolute mountain of evidence detailing the systemic administrative failures that, frankly, allowed this tragedy to happen. We are looking at the events leading up to January 6, 2023. That's when teacher Abby Zwerner was shot in her classroom in Newport News, Virginia.
And this involves so much more than just the shooting itself. We're talking about the $40 million civil lawsuit she filed.
Right, which argues gross negligence on the part of the assistant principal, Ebony Parker.
But also the subsequent criminal charges Parker now faces and the truly, truly devastating findings of the special grand jury report.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. We're going to give you, our listeners, a comprehensive, really detailed roadmap of this disaster. We'll cover the history of repeated escalating warnings about the student. We'll talk about the life-altering physical and psychological trauma Ms. Zwerner endured.
And we have to get into the incredibly complex legal landscape here, too. Things like sovereign immunity and the very high burden of proving gross negligence in court.
Exactly. We have to understand exactly what the administration knew, when they knew it, and crucially, why they repeatedly seemed to choose inaction.
And it's absolutely crucial we establish right at the start. This was not some random, isolated act of violence that nobody could see coming.
No.
The foundation for January 6th was poured long before that day. It was built on a steady stream of unaddressed behavioral crises and, well, fundamental administrative failures.
Okay, let's unpack this history then. Let's talk about the student involved, whom we'll refer to as JT, based on court documents. Our sources, the reports, they paint a picture of a child with documented, really substantial behavioral problems.
Substantial is putting it mildly.
And yet, the administration placed him in Mrs. Zwerner's first-grade classroom, a standard class, right, with 23 other young children.
That's correct. And here's a startling fact right out of the gate. JT had never actually completed kindergarten.
Never completed kindergarten. How does that even happen?
That detail is more than just academic. It's a critical piece of the negligence claim, you see. If a child hasn't successfully completed the previous grade level, especially if it's due to severe behavioral issues, why are they automatically placed in a standard first-grade class with over 20 peers?
Right. What's the process there?
The administration, and specifically Assistant Principal Dr. Parker, they knew he was significantly behind his peers, not just in literacy, but also in emotional regulation. Very significantly behind.
Was this maybe a resources issue? Were they just trying to push kids through the system? Or was it a fundamental failure of how they screen and place kids?
It strongly suggests, I think, institutional expediency took precedence over student and staff safety. Placing him in that large general education classroom, instead of maybe a specialized, smaller environment or, requiring a successful completion of kindergarten first, it immediately put Mrs. Zwerner and those other 23 6-year-olds at risk.
And the history of his behavior wasn't just, like, typical acting out for a young child.
Not at all. We absolutely have to discuss the incident that occurred during his kindergarten year. It's chilling.
This is the choking incident you mentioned earlier.
Oh.
It just sounds horrifying, and it really illustrates the school's failure to recognize a genuine, serious threat early on.
Okay, so let's go back. September 27, 2021. JT is in kindergarten. During some kind of classroom incident, his teacher, she's referred to in the documents as Mrs. White. She was sitting in a chair. JT apparently approached her from behind, placed his forearms around her neck, and pulled down so hard that she couldn't breathe.
He choked her.
He choked and strangled his kindergarten teacher, a 5-year-old.
That's life-threatening violence committed by a child that young. What on earth was the administrative response to an assault of that magnitude?
Shockingly inadequate, doesn't even begin to cover it. Mrs. White was removed from the classroom momentarily, understandably distraught, but the child, JT, was brought back to the same class later that same day.
The same day.
The same day. The receptionist apparently told Mrs. White, who was, beside herself, that the child had no business being back in class. But he was returned because, and get this, there was no administrator available to deal with the situation.
Let's just pause on that for a second.
Yeah.
A teacher is violently assaulted by a student, and the student is returned to her classroom because of a staffing issue, because no one was available.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it,
Yeah,
about the priorities, the operational fragility of that administrative structure.
absolutely.
And this is where the documentation failure becomes so key to the legal argument later on. The teacher's assistant who worked with Mrs. White, she was apparently so concerned about this catastrophic administrative failure, that she filled out an incident referral form for the choking.
Okay.
And she kept a personal hard copy of it.
Wow. Why would she feel the need to do that? Keep her own copy.
Yeah.
That suggests, like, a really deep-seated distrust in the official system, doesn't it?
Exactly. And her distrust, it turns out, was completely justified. The electronic disciplinary records in the school's main system, it's called Synergy, those records did not include any details whatsoever of the September 27th choking incident.
Nothing.
Nothing specific about the choking. This crucial, severe, potentially life-altering piece of information was actively missing from the official digital system. The very system that subsequent teachers, like Mrs. Zwerner, would rely upon when accepting JT into their first-grade classroom.
So this institutional memory loss, it wasn't an accident. It seems like it might have been engineered, maybe through negligence, maybe deliberate omission, which allowed JT to move into first grade with a record that was, well, compromised at best, or maybe actively misleading at worst.
And that sort of culture of silence, it seems, continued. Moving into the 2022-2023 school year, the year of the shooting, there was some recognition, okay, that intervention was needed. They initiated what's called the Student Success Team, or SST, process.
Right.
And they did implement some modifications initially, like reducing JT's school hours to just a few hours a day.
Okay, so they knew there were issues, but you're saying the process to find a real long-term solution was incredibly slow.
Painfully slow. While the SST process was initiated, they never actually progressed to the necessary next steps. They didn't pursue a functional behavioral assessment, an FBA, or crucially, an individualized education program, an IEP.
And those are the tools designed for exactly this kind of situation.
Right. Precisely. These programs, they're mandated under federal law for children with serious behavioral difficulties. An IEP could have provided extensive resources. It might have resulted in placing the child in a much smaller, self-contained classroom with behavioral specialists, which would have effectively removed the immediate danger from Mrs. Zwerner's large standard class.
But instead of sticking with that cautious, reduced schedule they'd started with, they actually did the opposite just days before the shooting.
Correct. On January 3rd, 2023, just 3 days before the shooting, a new plan was implemented, and it extended JT's school hours back to nearly a full day, staying until 2:30 p.m.
The timing is just impossible to ignore.
It really is. And then less than 48 hours later, on January 4th, JT again acted out aggressively. He threw Mrs. Zwerner's personal cell phone, cracking the screen.
Okay, so property damage this time. What was the response?
He was suspended for 1 day, and he returned on Friday, January 6th. The day of the shooting.
So the pattern is clear. Severe violence, like choking, is met with temporary fixes and poor documentation. Then, immediately after escalating property damage, the child is returned after a minimal suspension, with no real reassessment of this new, longer school day schedule.
Exactly. And the failures, the secrecy, it extended to the other parents in the class, too.
Right, you mentioned the secrecy around the child's history.
Yeah, the special grand jury report, which came out later, found it completely inappropriate that the administration actively withheld information from the parents of the other 23 children in that classroom.
What kind of information?
They were not informed that JT had a documented history of violence, including choking his kindergarten teacher.
Oh.
They weren't told about other prior behavioral incidents either.
That's not just institutional oversight. That feels like institutional secrecy that actively compromised the ability of other parents to protect their own children.
Absolutely. If those parents had known about the prior choking incident, I mean, can you imagine? They almost certainly would have demanded their children be moved out of that classroom immediately.
Of course.
So it creates this atmosphere, really, of willful blindness within the school environment. It seems like sacrificing the safety of the entire community to avoid having to deal with the complications of one high-needs student. And this, unfortunately, sets the stage perfectly for January 6th, where this whole culture of non-communication and inaction was put to the ultimate tragic test.
Okay, this brings us to the most legally damning section of the case, I think. The specific timeline on January 6th itself. This is the foundation for the gross negligence claim against Dr. Parker, the assistant principal. The argument isn't just that they failed once, The claim is they failed 4 separate escalating times within just a couple of hours.
That's the core of the plaintiff's case, yes. 4 distinct opportunities to intervene based on increasingly alarming information.
Let's reconstruct this minute by minute as best we can from the reports, starting around noon that day.
Okay, so around 12 p.m., this is before recess, we have the first critical report. Amy Kovac, who was a reading specialist at the school, she was told by 2 specific girls in Ms. Werner's class that JT had a gun in his bag.
Okay, direct report. A gun.
Yes. And when Kovac went to observe JT, she noticed deeply abnormal behavior. He was apparently balled up in his seat, acting very defensively, and he stated directly, "No one is getting that bag."
So Kovac takes that immediate threat seriously, I assume. What does she do?
She does. She goes directly to Dr. Parker, the assistant principal, the second in command at the school. She relays what the girl said he has a gun, and she describes the student's highly suspicious defensive posture and his comment about the bag.
And Dr. Parker's response?
According to testimony, she merely nodded acknowledgement. That's it. Took absolutely no action, didn't initiate a search of the bag, didn't call the principal, didn't call the school resource officer or police, just a nod.
Wow. But the situation evolves almost immediately after that, right? Ms. Werner then contacts Kovac again.
Yes, exactly. A short time later, Ms. Werner texted Kovac, adding a crucial new detail. She had actually seen JT move something from his backpack into his jacket pocket.
Okay, so the location potentially changed. It's not just the bag anymore.
Right. Kovac, to her credit, using her own initiative, did search the backpack after getting that text. She only found school items, nothing suspicious in the bag itself. But the warning had now become more specific. The potential weapon was now on his person, in his pocket.
And the defense later tried to use that backpack search, didn't they? To argue Parker had done enough, or that the initial concern was addressed.
They did, but it misses the point entirely. The real issue became the refusal to search the person once the information updated. The initial intelligence had shifted. The threat wasn't suspected to be in the bag anymore.
And was Parker informed about this update? That Zwerner saw him move something to his pocket?
Yes, the information was relayed, and Parker allegedly dismissed the possibility of a concealed weapon by saying something like, "He has little pockets."
He has little pockets, as a reason not to search for a gun.
That's the reported comment. It's arguably the first clear instance of dismissing a credible, escalating threat based on a superficial assessment after an initial search of the bag had already failed to locate the suspected item.
Okay, so that's warning number 1, essentially ignored. Moving into the afternoon after recess, report number 2 comes in.
Yes. This time, Jennifer West, who was another first-grade teacher, a lead teacher. She was approached by a different student from Zwerner's class. This student is referred to as R in the reports, and student R was visibly teary-eyed and clearly distressed.
Okay. What did student R say?
Student R relayed an even more explicit threat. He told Mrs. West that JT had a gun and had threatened to hurt us, blow us up.
Blow us up. So this moves the allegation from just possession of a weapon to explicit intent to harm others.
A significant escalation, yes.
So West communicates this escalated threat.
She does. She called the school office immediately and relayed this information to John Sims, who was the music teacher covering the phones at that moment. Sims then relayed the message directly to Dr. Parker.
And Parker's response this time, knowing the threat now includes blow us up, and the reporting student is distraught.
Again, according to testimony, she falls back on the insufficient previous action. She responded that the backpack had already been searched.
But the backpack search was irrelevant now.
Exactly. She apparently ignored the profound escalation of the threat, the specific words "blow us up," and the visible distress of the reporting student. She chose instead to rely on that perimeter search of the bag, which everyone involved now knew was likely irrelevant because the object was suspected to be in his pocket.
The information is becoming undeniable at this point. We move to report number 3. This involves the school counselor, Rolonzo Rawls.
Right. Mr. Rawls was actually tasked, possibly by Parker, with speaking to the distraught student R after Mrs. West's report.
Okay.
And during that conversation, student R revealed the most chilling detail yet. JT didn't just tell them he had a gun, he showed them actual bullets during recess, and he threatened them if they told anyone.
He showed them bullets. Okay, this is concrete. This isn't rumor anymore.
Absolutely concrete. So Rawls immediately confronts Dr. Parker with this new information. He expressed grave concerns about the confirmed presence of ammunition and strongly suggested JT's person needed to be searched immediately.
This has to be the moment, right? Confirmation of bullets, a direct request to search from a counselor. What does Parker do?
This is the moment of alleged willful indifference that really underpins the gross negligence claim. The testimony states Dr. Parker did not even look up from her computer when Rawls reported this.
Didn't look up.
Didn't look up. She refused permission for Rawls, a guidance counselor, to search the student.
On what grounds could she possibly refuse at this point?
This was also a clear violation of the school handbook's procedures. The handbook required specific safety actions by the assistant principal for what they call level 3 behaviors, which includes weapon possession. Things like isolating the student, notifying the principal, calling law enforcement. None of those actions were taken.
But why? What was her justification, if any, for refusing a search that could have saved lives?
According to Rawls's account, he was instructed to hold off on the search. The reason given, because the mother would be picking JT up from school soon anyway.
Wait. Hold off. Searching a child confirmed to have bullets because his mom is coming soon. That sounds like a calculated decision to just defer the problem. Get the kid off school property before anything happens.
That's certainly how the prosecution framed it. A potential prioritization of administrative convenience or avoiding the fallout of finding a weapon over the immediate safety of everyone in that building.
But Rawls, recognizing the immense danger, he didn't just stop there, did he? He went back to Parker again.
He did. This is report number 4. It's approximately 1:40 p.m. now. Rawls, having communicated the gravity of the gun and the ammunition report multiple times now, he asked directly again, for the 3rd or 4th time overall the information was relayed, if he could search the child's person.
And Parker's response this time?
Parker flatly refused, said no, and reiterated the instruction to hold off. No resource officer was called, no police were called, no search was permitted.
Could this refusal, playing devil's advocate here for a second, could it possibly be interpreted as just sheer inadequacy? Like, Dr. Parker was simply overwhelmed, panicked, made a terrible judgment call, rather than exhibiting willful indifference to safety.
That is precisely what the defense argued in the civil trial. That this was an unprecedented situation, she wasn't properly trained for it, and her decision, while wrong, was inadequate, not indifferent. It was a failure of judgment, not a failure of caring.
But the legal standard for gross negligence is higher than that, isn't it?
Much higher. It requires proving willful or wanton disregard for human life, or reckless indifference to the consequences. The prosecution and Mrs. Zwerner's attorneys argued that by receiving 4 separate escalating reports, including confirmation of ammunition, and then actively prohibiting authorized personnel, like Mr. Rawls, from performing a legal and necessary search. She crossed that line. She didn't just fail to act, she actively blocked those who were trying to act. That, they argued, constitutes reckless disregard.
And the window for action closed just 20 minutes later.
Exactly. At 1:58 p.m., the outcome of that willful delay, that refusal to act, manifested in the worst possible way. Mrs. Zwerner was at a reading table with a small group. About 16 students were still in the class. JT turned his body towards her, apparently for the first time since before recess. Removed the loaded firearm, which was later found to contain 8 bullets total from his jacket pocket, aimed it directly at Mrs. Zwerner from less than 6 feet away, and pulled the trigger.
Oh my God.
A 6-year-old girl sitting nearby reportedly saw it happen and ran out of the classroom in terror. The failure to act was complete, and the consequence was immediate and devastating.
The chaos that followed the shooting. It seems like it revealed even further cracks in the school's security infrastructure. Even with a rapid police response, there were still systemic issues hindering the immediate mitigation efforts.
That's right. The Newport News police were incredibly quick, arriving on scene around 2 p.m., just minutes after the shot. However, the first officer to arrive, Sheriff's Office Criminals, Thomas Blythe, he testified later that he couldn't actually get into the school immediately. The doors were locked. He had to bang on the locked doors for about 1 minute, which feels like an eternity in that situation, until a janitor finally heard him and let them in.
A whole minute. In an active shooting scenario, a 1-minute delay because a door is locked or communication failed.
Yeah.
That's potentially catastrophic. It really speaks to a lack of seamless emergency protocol, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. When Corbel Blythe finally got inside, he found Amy Kovac, the reading specialist, who had filed that very first report about the gun.
Right.
She had rushed in after hearing the shot and was restraining the young child. J.T. Blythe himself was reportedly taken aback by just how young the suspect was, seeing the weapon lying on the floor nearby.
And it was Kovac who called 911.
Yes, while holding the child. And J.T.'s immediate response when confronted by Kovac, according to her testimony, was that chilling line, "F you. I shot my teacher.
But that expression,
Yeah,
that defiance and explicit acknowledgement from a 6-year-old is just almost unimaginable. It's deeply disturbing.
it really is.
Okay, now let's pivot to Mrs. Werner's injuries. Because the scale of her physical trauma is, in many ways, the direct, measurable consequence of Dr. Parker's alleged inaction.
The physical trauma was and continues to be absolutely life-altering. The chief of surgery who treated her, Dr. Daniel Munn, testified in stark detail during the trial. The bullet passed through her left hand, which she likely raised instinctively in defense, and then it entered her chest, lodging there. Critically, the bullet's trajectory passed approximately 2 centimeters less than an inch away from a major heart artery. It was, without any question, a potentially fatal, life-threatening injury.
And she immediately suffered a collapsed lung from the chest wound.
Yes, which required a chest tube to reinflate it, and that has led to permanent consequences. Her lung tissue is now scarred directly to the chest wall, which, her doctors explain, significantly limits future surgical options in that area of her body should she ever need them for other reasons.
But perhaps the most enduring and sort of invasive injury is the fact that the bullet fragment is still lodged in her chest, right? They couldn't remove it.
Correct. And this has devastating long-term complications. Because of the risk posed by those bullet fragments they could potentially move or heat up during certain medical procedures, she cannot undergo MRI scans for the rest of her life.
Wow. No MRIs ever again.
Ever again. Her physician specifically noted this is a serious and ongoing concern, particularly for crucial future medical needs. Like, for example, routine breast cancer screening, which often relies very heavily on MRI technology for detection, especially in denser tissue. She is permanently restricted in her future medical diagnosis options because of this bullet.
That's unbelievable. And then there is the hand injury itself, which sounds absolutely catastrophic, even apart from the chest wound.
Her orthopedic trauma surgeon, Dr. Romney Anderson, described it as a devastating hand injury. He actually went so far as to compare it to a war injury.
A war injury?
Yes. She sustained extensive bone fractures and severe soft tissue damage in her hand and forearm. She's already undergone multiple complex surgeries. They've inserted metal wires, performed bone grafts, repaired tendons.
What are the lasting functional problems with the hand? Is she able to use it normally?
Far from it. She has sustained permanent nerve damage, which results in a significant loss of sensation in parts of her hand. There is also a 75% laceration, a tear of the tendon that extends the fingers. Dr. Anderson confirmed in his testimony, the hand will never be normal. It will never match the strength or range of motion of her other hand.
And there are future risks, too.
Yes. Furthermore, she faces a heightened lifelong risk of painful tendon ruptures in that hand as she ages because of the damage. Her current orthopedic surgeon has actually recommended yet more surgery.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Another painful procedure involving a bone graft, this time taken from her pelvic area to try and help stabilize the damaged bones and address her ongoing chronic pain in the hand.
It's just a truly permanent alteration of her body, her physical capabilities, and her future health. And beyond the purely physical, the psychological and emotional impact has clearly been profound.
Absolutely. Mrs. Zwerner testified herself. She said that large chunks of her memory from the day itself are just gone, which is a very typical response to extreme trauma. But she distinctly recalls that terrifying moment lying there thinking she might be dying or maybe had already died. A forensic psychiatrist diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, major depressive disorder, and generalized anxiety. She described struggling immensely with simple daily tasks, now things we take for granted, like opening a bag of chips because of the hand injury and the trauma. And the experience has led her to want to be isolated, to withdraw.
The family testimony really seemed to crystallize the transformation in her personality, didn't it?
It really did. Her mother, Julie Zwerner, testified that she had to help Abby with nearly all daily activities that required two-hands dressing, cooking, bathing for over a month during her initial recovery. And her twin sister, Hannah, gave incredibly powerful testimony. She described Abby as having been somewhat timid even before the shooting, but she stated emphatically that the person Addie is now, she is just not the same person she was. She's become reclusive, she's terrified of crowds and sudden noises, and she has immense difficulty finding joy in activities she once loved. And of course, she's completely unable to return to a classroom setting. The career she loved is gone.
And this level of clear, permanent suffering, physical, emotional, psychological, This is what the defense team tried to chip away at during the civil trial against Parker, right?
They absolutely did. It's a standard defense tactic in high-stakes personal injury cases. During the cross-examination of Mrs. Zwerner and her family, the defense introduced evidence that was clearly intended to undermine the perceived severity of her ongoing distress.
What kind of evidence?
Well, they highlighted, for instance, that she had managed to attend a couple of concerts. They mentioned she sent appreciative messages to artists like Taylor Swift and Odessa after seeing their shows. They also noted she had completed some coursework for cosmetology school, planning for a future career perhaps in 2025, and that she had appeared on national television on the Today Show to talk about her experience.
Right. It's a classic strategy, isn't it? Use these isolated moments of relatively high function or any public appearance to suggest that the claimant must be exaggerating their overall disability or suffering.
Exactly. The implication is, see, she can go to concerts, she can plan for the future, she can talk on TV. Maybe the PTSD and depression aren't as debilitating as claimed.
But her family provided context for those moments, didn't they?
They did. Her sister, Hannah, testified quite movingly that she had basically drained her own bank account to take Abby to that Taylor Swift concert. Why? Because she desperately needed Abby to have some kind of positive experience, something to look forward to amidst the darkness. And even that public event, Hannah explained, was a major challenge that required very careful planning just to manage Abby's anxiety and triggers.
So the argument really became less about whether she suffered at all and more about whether her profound suffering allowed for any moments of attempted normalcy or seeking joy.
Precisely. But at the end of the day, the sheer volume and severity of the documented medical evidence, the surgeries, the nerve damage, the bullet still in her chest, the psychiatric diagnoses remain overwhelming and largely undisputed.
Okay, so that physical evidence, the timeline of ignored warnings, the profound impact, it all led directly to this $40 million civil lawsuit against the former assistant principal, Ebony Parker. Let's dive deep now into the legal standard they had to meet here. Gross negligence.
This is absolutely the core legal struggle in the civil case. In Virginia, like in many states, suing public employees, especially in their official capacity, often requires proving more than just simple negligence. Simple negligence is just carelessness, basically failing to act as a reasonably prudent person would.
Right.
Gross negligence is a much higher bar. It's generally defined as a kind of reckless indifference to the consequences of one's actions or inaction. It implies a willful or wanton disregard for human life and safety. The plaintiff, Ms. Zwerner, essentially had to prove that Dr. Parker exercised not even the slightest degree of care in the face of a known, severe, and escalating danger.
And the plaintiff's case, her lawyers, they relied heavily on the stacking of those four warnings we discussed, right? The progression of information.
Exactly. They brought in an education expert, Dr. Ann Shufflebarger, who testified that Parker's inaction repeatedly breached the expected standard of care for a school administrator. But Dr. Shufflebarger also pointed out something crucial. It wasn't just inaction, it was Parker's alleged action of actively stopping others, specifically Mr. Rawls, the counselor, from taking necessary preventative steps, like searching the child. That elevates it beyond simple oversight, the plaintiff argued.
And the defense, Parker's lawyers, they had a significant challenge. But what was their core argument against gross negligence?
Their main argument was that this specific incident, a 6-year-old intentionally shooting a teacher, was virtually unprecedented and therefore not reasonably foreseeable by Dr. Parker. They argued that the decisions she made in those 2 hours leading up to the shooting must be judged based only on the information available to her at that exact moment, without the benefit of 20/20 hindsight knowing the tragic outcome.
So their framing was, this was inadequacy, perhaps incompetence, a series of bad decisions made under immense unique pressure. But it wasn't indifference. It wasn't the deliberate decision to ignore the danger and let whatever happens happen.
Precisely. They wanted the jury to see Parker's actions as flawed, maybe even negligent in the ordinary sense, but not rising to that level of willful or wanton disregard required for gross negligence.
But before this civil trial against Parker could even proceed, they had to overcome a monumental legal hurdle that the school board itself tried to impose, right? Using Virginia's Workers' Compensation Act.
Yes, that was a major early battle in this case. The Newport News School Board initially argued that Mrs. Zwerner's entire $40 million lawsuit was barred by the Virginia Workers' Compensation Act.
Explain that maneuver. Why did the school board think workers' comp should be the exclusive remedy for being shot by a student in your classroom?
Okay, so workers' compensation systems are generally designed to be the sole or exclusive remedy for employees who suffer injuries that arise out of and in the course of their employment. The trade-off is supposed to be. The employee gets guaranteed, though usually limited benefits like medical bills and some lost wages without having to prove fault, but they give up the right to sue the employer for potentially much larger damages in civil court.
So the school board was essentially arguing that getting shot by a student is a risk that arises out of the employment of being a first-grade teacher.
That was their argument. Incredibly, they basically tried to say that violence against teachers, citing various reports and statistics, is now, sadly, part of the workplace reality. They were trying to categorize this horrific, specific shooting as just another unfortunate, perhaps foreseeable, workplace risk covered exclusively by workers' comp. If they'd won that argument, Zwerner would only have been entitled to standard workers' comp benefits, which are strictly capped and would be nowhere near the $40 million she was seeking for her lifelong injuries and trauma.
But the court fundamentally rejected that framing. And that ruling was seen as pretty critical, even somewhat surprising in Virginia law, wasn't it?
It was indeed surprising to many legal experts because Virginia's workers' comp law is traditionally interpreted very strictly, often in favor of the employer limiting liability. But Newport News Circuit Court Judge Matthew Hoffman ruled decisively in favor of Mrs. Zwerner on this point. He found that her injuries specifically did not arise out of her employment.
What was his reasoning?
He explicitly stated, and this is key, that the danger of being shot by a student is not one that is peculiar or unique to the job of a first-grade teacher. He drew a line.
Why was that ruling considered so surprising?
Because the line between a risk unique to the job and a general risk that happens at the job can often be very blurry in workers' comp cases. For instance, if a teacher slips on a wet floor in the school hallway, that's almost certainly covered exclusively by workers' comp. If a teacher is assaulted by, say, an angry parent in the parking lot, that might still fall under workers' comp as a general risk associated with dealing with the public in that environment.
Right.
But Judge Hoffman isolated the highly specific nature of being intentionally shot by a 6-year-old student under your direct care. He determined that this specific injury, in this specific context, was so far outside the normally expected environment and risks of being a first-grade educator that it did not qualify as an injury arising out of her employment in the sense required by the Workers' Comp Act. This ruling was crucial because it allowed the massive gross negligence claim against Parker, the individual, to proceed to trial.
That decision essentially separated the extreme, alleged, willful failure of the administration in this specific case from the everyday, sadly more common, risks of teaching.
Exactly. It was a huge victory for Zwerner early on, and the school board immediately tried to appeal Judge Hoffman's ruling. But the Virginia Court of Appeals declined to hear the appeal at that stage, which solidified the judge's decision and cleared the path for the civil trial against Parker to happen.
Now, to fully understand the difficulty of holding the institution accountable, we really have to look at the legal shield the school board itself enjoys. This is separate from the suit against Parker as an individual. We need to introduce this concept of sovereign immunity, maybe using that other Newport News case, Newport News School Board v. ZM, as an illustration.
Right. Sovereign immunity is a very old legal doctrine. It basically protects public entities, the state itself, cities, counties, and yes, public school boards from being sued by citizens unless the government has explicitly passed a law allowing itself to be sued under specific circumstances. It's like this inherent legal shield the public bodies have.
So you generally can't just sue the school board for negligence like you can sue a private company.
Not easily, no. There have to be specific statutory waivers. This is a major reason why Mrs. Zwerner's lawsuit targeted Dr. Parker, the individual employee whose alleged gross negligence directly caused the harm, rather than primarily suing the Newport News School Board itself. Suing the board directly for negligence would likely have been dismissed very quickly based on sovereign immunity.
And the ZM case you mentioned really reinforces just how powerful and strictly interpreted that sovereign immunity shield is in Virginia.
It really does. The ZM case involves some very serious allegations of intentional mistreatment and negligence by school staff toward a nonverbal autistic child while he was riding on a school bus. The parents tried to sue the school board directly.
Okay.
They argued that the harm occurred on a school-operated vehicle, the bus, and they thought this might fall under a specific statutory exception to sovereign immunity related to school transportation.
But the Virginia Supreme Court ultimately ruled against the parents, didn't they? Why?
They did. And the reasoning highlights how narrowly these waivers are interpreted. The relevant law, Virginia Code, Section 22.1194, waives sovereign immunity only if a school-operated vehicle is involved in an accident. The Supreme Court looked at the facts in ZM and said essentially that while terrible misconduct might have happened on the bus itself wasn't involved in an accident in the traditional sense, like a collision or hitting something or malfunctioning.
So even if intentional harm or severe negligence occurs on the school bus, as long as the bus itself doesn't crash or have a mechanical failure, the school board is completely immune from liability for what happens on that bus.
According to the Virginia Supreme Court's interpretation in ZM, yes. The alleged torts, the misconduct, happened on the vehicle, but they didn't arise from the vehicle being in an accident. Therefore, the sovereign immunity shield held firm, and the school board could not be sued directly for that alleged harm.
That seems like a massive gap in accountability, especially for vulnerable students relying on school transportation.
It's certainly a consequence of the strict interpretation of that statute. And the contrast with this Zwerner case is stark, isn't it? Dr. Parker, the individual employee, faces potential multi-million-dollar liability if found grossly negligent. But the larger overarching entity, the school board, which was ultimately responsible for hiring her, training her, overseeing her, and for the systemic failures like the broken buzzer system, remains legally shielded from direct negligence claims for the most part due to sovereign immunity.
Which is why the findings of the special grand jury become so critically important, right? Because the grand jury can look at the systemic failures even if civil courts are blocked from holding the institution directly liable in the same way.
Exactly. The grand jury investigation offered a different, arguably broader lens on accountability, looking beyond just one individual's actions on one day.
Okay, so the civil trial against Parker hinges on her personal actions and the standard of gross negligence. But let's shift now to that bigger indictment of the institution itself, which was revealed in the findings of the special grand jury SGJ investigation. They looked across the entire administrative structure at Richneck Elementary.
Yes, and the SGJ report released in April 2024 is arguably even more alarming in some ways than the civil trial testimony because it really paints a picture of systemic dysfunction. Their overarching finding was, and I quote, a shocking and systematic lack of response and lack of communication by the school administration that allowed the risk level with the student to escalate completely uncontrollably.
And based on their independent investigation into that January 6th timeline, the SGJ found probable cause to recommend criminal charges against Dr. Parker, correct?
They did. Specifically, they found probable cause to indict Dr. Parker for felony child neglect under Virginia Code Section 18.23701.1b.
Felony child neglect. Explain that charge in this context.
The grand jury concluded that Dr. Parker, as a person responsible for the care of children under 18, namely all the students in that classroom, engaged in a willful act or omission specifically, her repeated refusal to permit a search despite credible warnings of a gun and bullets that constituted a reckless disregard for the life and safety of those children. Her alleged failure wasn't just potentially civilly negligent. The grand jury believed it rose to the level of criminal recklessness endangering children. This moves the case from civil liability for damages into the realm of potential criminal conviction and punishment for Parker.
So, beyond Parker's individual actions, the SGJ also highlighted some deeply concerning systemic administrative issues, particularly around how they handled evidence in student records. It suggests more than just incompetence, maybe an institutional culture of covering things up.
Absolutely. One major point was the status of JT's disciplinary records. We already talked about how the electronic synergy system mysteriously omitted the details of that critical 2021 choking incident, the one the kindergarten teaching assistant felt compelled to keep her own hard copy of.
Right.
But it gets worse. When law enforcement executed search warrants after the shooting to secure all of JT's records, physical files were actually found to be missing. One file was apparently missing from the main school office, and another, which was last believed to be in Mrs. Zwerner's classroom and presumably collected after the shooting, was never recovered either.
Missing files in the middle of a shooting investigation. That's convenient or deeply concerning.
Extremely concerning. And this detail about the missing files leads us directly to perhaps the most suspicious testimony provided to the grand jury. This involved the school district's HR director at the time, Dr. Lakeisha Parrott.
Okay, what happened with the HR director?
This is where it gets really interesting and frankly suggests potential institutional efforts to obstruct or control the narrative. Dr. Parrott, the director of human resources for the entire district, testified to the special grand jury that she had total amnesia regarding how she came to possess, handle, and eventually return a copy of JT's disciplinary file to law enforcement after the shooting.
Total amnesia about handling the file of the child involved in a school shooting that was now a massive criminal investigation.
That was her testimony. She claimed she didn't recall how she got the file, why she might have had it in her home or her car outside of the office, or what prompted her to eventually return it to the investigators.
In a major criminal investigation involving a school shooting, the director of human resources for the district claims complete memory loss over obtaining and handling key evidence that documents the shooter's past violence and the school's awareness of it. I mean, that stretches credulity past the breaking point, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The special grand jury clearly didn't buy it either. They found her testimony highly suspicious and lacking competence. They went further and specifically noted that a continuing investigation was needed to determine if Dr. Parrott herself should potentially be criminally charged with obstruction of justice.
Wow, the implication is staggering, isn't it?
Yeah.
Either this was an administrative staff so fundamentally incompetent they couldn't keep track of or account for crucial evidence in a major crisis, or it was a deliberate attempt by someone high up in the administration to hide, control, or perhaps alter crucial, potentially incriminating documents regarding the student's history of violence and the administration's prior knowledge and handling of it.
It certainly speaks to a culture where protecting the institution or individuals within it may have superseded the obligation to transparency and full cooperation with law enforcement.
Exactly. And then beyond the record-keeping issues, we look at the physical security gaps the SGJ identified. These weren't complex failures. They were basic, fundamental breakdowns proving the system was compromised at almost every level.
Yes, the report detailed several critical security failures during that 2022-2023 school year. The most glaring, perhaps because it's so basic, seemed to be the front door buzzer system.
What was wrong with it?
It's the main system for controlling who enters the school building during the day. You buzz, the office sees you, they let you in. The SGJ found that the front door buzzer system at Richneck Elementary didn't work properly for weeks leading up to January 6th.
Weeks. A broken front door buzzer.
For weeks. The grand jury pointed out, chillingly, that had the shooter on January 6th been an outside adult intruder instead of a student already inside, the failure of this simple, relatively inexpensive security system could have guaranteed a mass casualty event. It connects that kind of mundane, day-to-day bureaucratic failure, not fixing a buzzer, directly to potential life and death stakes.
They also noted inadequate school resource officer, SRO, coverage, didn't they?
They did. Richneck Elementary did not have its own full-time, dedicated SRO consistently present in the building. The school apparently shared one SRO with another school, meaning the officers split their time between the two locations.
So security was part-time, essentially. What was the procedure if an emergency happened when the SRO wasn't there?
According to testimony from Parker herself, if an emergency occurred when the shared SRO was absent, teachers were instructed to call the non-emergency police number, or try to reach the surrounding SRO who is physically at the other school.
Call the non-emergency number for an active threat. That can't be right.
It sounds unbelievable, but that was the reported procedure. There was apparently no direct emergency communication protocol clearly posted or practiced for when the SRO wasn't on site. They also found the school relied heavily on an informal, undocumented mini-referral system for handling discipline issues, which often bypassed the official Synergy database entirely. This just compounded the lack of clear, documented accountability for student behavior.
Okay, so if we just step back and look at the whole picture painted by the grand jury, we have missing student records, potentially perjured testimony from a high-ranking HR official suggesting obstruction, a front door security buzzer broken for weeks, inadequate and inconsistent SRO coverage with flawed emergency protocols, and the repeated ignoring of direct warnings about a gun and bullets on the day itself.
It shows the administration didn't just fail in the final moments to react to the gun warnings. They had already failed for weeks or months to fix the fundamental systems and address the known behavioral issues that created the conditions for that tragedy to occur.
The system itself was broken.
It demonstrates a pervasive, systemic failure of care, communication, and oversight. The grand jury was unequivocal in stating that even administrators who weren't directly involved in the January 6th decisions were culpable nonetheless by their lack of action on these broader issues because the entire system seemed almost designed to fail under stress.
So what is this comprehensive investigation, bringing together the civil case, criminal charges, the grand jury report? What does it ultimately teach us? What are the takeaways?
Well, I think the Richneck case, sadly, stands as a truly devastating case study in the consequences of institutional negligence and failed systems. When crucial information regarding extreme violence is siloed away, or maybe actively hidden or just outright ignored, and when policies and basic procedures designed to protect life are intentionally bypassed or simply neglected due to complacency or convenience, the result can be, and in this case was, utterly catastrophic.
And the key failure wasn't necessarily a lack of awareness, was it?
No, that's the most damning part. The tragedy here wasn't fundamentally rooted in a lack of awareness that this child posed some risk. It was rooted in a demonstrable, repeated failure to act meaningfully on specific, explicit, escalating warnings about the imminent danger he posed on that particular day. It was the failure of action, not just awareness.
The outcome of the grand jury report, combined with the legal pressure from Mrs. Zwerner's lawsuit, it did force the Newport News public school system, NNPSS, to finally implement some significant changes, didn't it? What were the key recommendations aimed at accountability and future safety?
Yes, the SGJ issued several strong, concrete recommendations aimed directly at the security gaps they identified. They urged NNPSS to install permanent metal detectors at Richneck. They recommended ensuring 2 full-time school resource officers were staffed at the school daily to address that dangerous, inconsistent coverage. They also mandated that the school division ensure all classrooms have permanent, solid walls and lockable doors, getting rid of those flimsy temporary partitions that some classrooms apparently had. And they stressed the need to verify that emergency communication buttons were installed and fully functioning in every single classroom. Basic stuff, really.
And they specifically addressed that critical procedural failure, Dr. Parker being able to unilaterally refuse the search of the child's person.
Yes, absolutely. NNPSS was told in no uncertain terms to reassess and revise its policies regarding who has the authority to search a child's person for weapons and under what circumstances. Relying solely on administrators or SROs being immediately available and willing to act proved tragically detrimental here. The recommendation implies a need for a system that perhaps empowers other authorized, trained personnel, maybe lead teachers, counselors like Mr. Rawls, to conduct an emergency search when the usual authorities are not present, are unavailable, or are actively refusing to act on credible information.
Makes sense. And they also addressed the lingering trauma for the other students.
They did. Recognizing the immense trauma experienced not just by Mrs. Zwerner, but by her students who witnessed or were terrified by the event, the SGJ recommended that any children still significantly affected by the shooting with that effect confirmed by a medical professional should be allowed to transfer to a different school within the district as an exception to normal transfer policies. This was important because some families' initial requests for transfers had apparently been denied.
So we've detailed the horrific injuries, the complex civil fight, the damning grand jury findings showing systematic decay. The $40 million civil trial ultimately focuses on individual culpability. Was Ebony Parker grossly negligent? But this broader context from the SGJ report, it really leaves us with a profound final thought, doesn't it? Especially for every school district administrator or board member listening right now.
It really does. While the legal system, particularly the civil suit, necessarily zooms in on whether Dr. Parker's specific actions and inactions on January 6th met the high bar for gross negligence. The systemic failures documented by the grand jury, the front door buzzer broken for weeks, the missing disciplinary file suggesting cover-ups, the suspicious amnesia of the HR director, the inadequate SRO plan, they show that the entire administrative apparatus may have fostered a culture of complacency, secrecy, or willful blindness long before that day.
Yeah.
So if the system itself was actively compromised, if the flow of critical safety information was broken, and if knowledge of past violence was perhaps deliberately kept compartmentalized or hidden from faculty and even parents, then we have to ask, where does the ultimate responsibility for this systemic failure truly lie?
Is the final responsibility only with the individual assistant principal who repeatedly refused the search in those final hours? Or does it rest equally, perhaps even more heavily, with the entire administrative structure, the principal, the central office, the school board, that allowed those conditions to fester? The structure that prioritized, it seems, administrative expediency and maybe self-protection over the fundamental safety of every single child and teacher in that building.
That's the essential and deeply uncomfortable question for maintaining trust and ensuring genuine safety in our schools moving forward. It goes far beyond just Richneck Elementary.
An essential question indeed. Thank you for walking us through this incredibly complex, detailed, and frankly, heartbreaking deep dive today.
My pleasure. It's a vital story to understand.